In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at how to work with forms within Flutter. We're going to be taking a look at how to work with the form widget, how to add fields to the form widget, how to manage the state of the form, how to validate the different fields that are within this form for different patterns that we specify, and a whole bunch of other things. Our application is going to have the following functionality. We'll create an example registration page where the user will be giving us the email, phone, and password in separate text fields. And only when the user provides us this information in the correct format will we allow them to proceed. So for example, if I click register right now, since there is nothing that's added to any of these fields, we're going to get an error for all of these fields. If for the email I specify something which is not an email, then it's still going to give me an error. But as soon as I specify an email that's correct, for example, like so, then it's going to say that that field is correctly done, and now we can proceed to the next one. So for the phone number, I'll do something quick as well. And if I click register, you can see that the phone number is now being registered as well. And finally, for the password, if I add password that doesn't have the correct length, it's going to give me an error. But as soon as I add the correct length and I click register, you can see that it lets us proceed, and it gives us an actual output on the form, letting us know that the form data was validated and saved. And this was the information that was added into the form for the different fields. So let's get into the video. As a side note, links to all of the resources that I mentioned within this video, as well as a link to the source code, can be found in the description below. So feel free to take a look at it if you're confused at any point. To get started, I just want to let you guys know that we're not using any dependencies, so we'll jump right into coding. For now, I have an empty Flutter project initialized in which I have created a home page widget, which is a stateful widget, and it's returning in its build method an empty scaffold and nothing else. So we're going to be starting from this point, and in the main.dart file for the material apps home property, I've set that to be the home page. So to get started, the first thing that we have to do is understand how we're going to be showing our form and how our UI is going to be laid out. So within the scaffold, the first thing that I'm going to be doing is adding an app bar. So this is fairly simple. So all I'll do is copy and paste this code block in. And then after that, I'll define the body attribute. And I'm going to say that we'll make a call to a function called build UI. And then after this, I'll come to the bottom of my class. And here I'm going to say that I will define the function now, build UI, like so. And within this, what I'll do is I'll return a safe area widget like so. And for the child of this, I will add a padding widget. And then for the child of this, I am going to add a form widget, which will come to what a form widget is and what it allows us to do. But let's do that, add the remaining commas, and let's get into it. For padding, what I'll do is that I'll copy and paste the padding parameter in, just adding padding to the form. And then let's come to the form field. So form field, basically, as the name suggests, allows us to implement a form within Flutter. And the beauty of using a form widget is that it's going to allow us to implement multiple different form rules within this. And we're going to be able to manage the state of all of them using this form. And you'll see that in a bit. So for the child of this form, since we are going to have multiple text fields within this, what I'm going to be doing is saying that we're going to have a column like so. And then for the column, the children's list is for now going to be empty. Then what I'm going to be doing is, before I proceed with adding any children, we're going to be giving a key to our form, which is going to allow us to manage and persist the state of our form during the runtime of our application. So to do that, I'll come to the top of my homepage state class, and here I'm going to define a finer variable, and I'm going to say that this is going to be called form key, and then I'm going to say that it's going to be of type global key, and then it's going to have a specific type, which is going to be form state like so, and then initialize it like so. So once this is done, I will come down to my form, and then for the key property for this form, I'm going to give it the form key like so. So now we've linked up our form with the key, and using this key, we'll be able to manage the state of our form, and you'll see how it comes handy later on. So now that this is done, the next thing that we're going to be doing is discussing how we're going to be basically adding fields to our actual form for getting the email, password, and then the phone number. So if I go back to the existing application, you're going to see that our actual form fields look quite similar in terms of styling. The only difference is that we changed the validation logic for each of them, as well as what the hint text is. So what we're going to be doing to achieve this functionality within the actual application that we're building is to actually create a reusable widget that we can use and then change certain parameters of that. So to do that, in my lib folder, I'm going to create a new folder, which I'm going to call utils, which I'm going to call widgets like so. And then underneath of widgets, I'm going to create a file which I'm going to call custom form field like so .dart. And then I'm going to open it up. I'm going to create a stateless widget, and I'm going to call this to be custom form field like so, and then we can proceed with actually adding some stuff to it. But before I add anything to the custom form field, I'll come back to my home page, go to the column, and here I'm going to add the custom form field as a child, and then do command save so that we can actually see it. Then I'll come back to my custom form field, and instead of returning a placeholder, what I'm going to be doing is returning a padding widget. And then for the padding, I'll just copy and paste it in, since it's going to be very similar to what we had done before. We're just adding padding from all of the sides. Now that this is done, the next thing that I'm going to be doing is defining the child, and the child is going to be a text form field. So we're not going to be using a text field, we're going to be using a text form fields. And when you're working with forms, you have to use the appropriate fields with them. So a text form field is going to work with the form, a text field will not. So I'll do text form field and do command save. And as you can see, we can see the text form field now, and we can add some data to it. But what I want to do is basically set it up in a way that I can pass some parameters in to change certain parameters for the text form field. So for that, what I'm going to be doing is, firstly, I'm going to be defining, is the text form field going to allow us to obscure text? What obscure text basically means that it's going to hide the input on the actual form field. So if obscure text is true, then we just see dots. And if this is false, then we can actually see what's typed in. So to have this actually passed in, what I'm going to be doing is that I'm going to come to the top of my class, and I'm going to say that I'm going to define a variable here called obscure text. And then I'm going to say that this is going to be a named parameter that's going to be passed in, and it's going to be optional. So the default value for this is going to be false, like so, and do command save. And then I'm going to set the obscure text property here to be obscure text, like so. Once this is done, the next thing that I'm going to be doing is defining the actual hint text. So for that, I'm going to define the decoration property. I'm going to say that it's going to be of type input decoration, and then the hint text here is going to be dependent upon the field. So it's not going to be the same. It's going to be email for one of the field's password. So we have to pass this information in as well. So for that, what I'll do is that I'll say I'll have a final string, and this is going to be called hint text. And this is also going to be a named parameter, but this is going to be required. So I'll add required before this and add it to the constructor, like so. Once this is done, I'll come back and add hint text here and do command save. And then I'll come back to my home page and actually add these properties in by just adding them. Hint text, and the hint text here is going to be email, and do command save. So now we're seeing email. But if I copy this custom text form field, I paste it again, and I say password here, then you're going to see that for the other text field is password. And if I copy and paste it again, and for the third one, I'm going to say that it's going to be phone, like so. So as you can see, now we have similarly styled text fields with different hint texts. So let's keep going. So now that we've defined the actual decoration property, the next thing that we're going to be talking about is how do we define the logic that's going to take place to actually validate the input that we've put within a specific text form field. So to do that, there is actually a callback function, which is called validator. And what this function basically expects us to do is that it's going to be called every time the validate call is called upon the form for each of the text form fields that are within the form. And then if this actual function callback returns a value that's other than null, then it's going to assume that the validation failed and it's going to show that error. But for this logic to work, we have to implement a certain bit of other things. So we'll go back to our home page, we'll implement those things, and we'll come back here. So in our home page, before we can actually validate our form, we need to have a UI element that's going to allow us to validate our form. So in our case, that's actually going to be a button that's going to allow us to do this. So to do this, what I'll basically do is that after my third custom form field within the same column, children list, I'm going to add an elevated button, like so. It's going to have an on-pressed callback, like so. And then what I'm going to do for the elevate button is that I'm going to add a child. And this child is just going to be a text widget which says register. So now if I click on it, nothing's going on. When I click on this button, the on-pressed callback is going to be called. So within this, what I'm going to be doing is that I'm going to say if the form key dot current state and then dot validate. And this is all we have to do to validate our form. So when we call this function, it's going to return a true or false to us. If the value that is returned to us is true, then we'll call whatever code is within this function block, which for now is empty. And if this is false, then we won't proceed. And when we call validate, what's basically going to happen is, since we've linked this form key with the form, it's going to basically go ahead and go through all of the form fields that we've added and call the validate function on them, which we've defined here, the validator function, and try to see if for all of the validator functions, we make sure that all of the data that's inputted within these fields is valid. So if I do this, now we can go back to our custom form field and define the validator logic. So since all of these form fields are for different types of information, one's for phone, one's for password, and one's for email, I need to define different logic for each of them. So a good way to do this is to actually use something which is called Dart extensions, and you'll see what Dart extensions allow us to do. But we're going to be using Dart extensions to basically add some helper methods to the actual string object, and then use these alongside some regular expressions, which I'll also explain what they are, to validate whether a certain string is valid or not. So to do this, the first thing that I'll do is that I'll create a new folder. I'll call it extensions. And then within this, I'm going to create a new file, which I'll call extensions.dart. And also what I'll do is that I'll rename the actual folder name to be utils. Then within this, what I'm going to be doing is that I'll create an extension. This is Dart extension. It's going to be called ext string, so extension of string. And I'm going to say that this extension is going to apply on the string class. And then within this, what I'm going to say that now our string class is going to support some functions. The first one is going to be a function which will return us a Boolean. It's going to be a getter, and it's going to be called isValidEmail. So we're going to check if a string is a valid email. And the way we're going to be doing this is by using regular expressions. So I'll create a regular expression and then I'll explain what they are. And this is a common phenomenon that is used widely across programming. And what regular expressions allow us to do is define a certain pattern and then match strings against this pattern to see if they conform to that pattern or not. So for example, if I want to make sure that the password that's entered by a user, that string conforms to a pattern that the password length has to be more than 8 characters and the first letter needs to be a capital letter, then a good way of doing this is to use regular expressions. And you can find regular expressions for common use cases on the internet, websites dedicated that can help you learn how regular expressions work. But for the use case of this tutorial, since I don't want to make these videos too long, I'm going to be just giving you these regular expressions. So firstly, what we have to do to use regular expressions within Flutter, or Dart I should say, is to create a variable which I'm going to say email regular expression. And then we define regular expressions by using the regexp object. And within this, we pass a string that defines a regular expression. So I'll copy and paste it in like so. And regular expression strings, before the double quote, we use an R to define that this is a regular expression. And then what I'm going to do is that I'm going to say that we're going to return, and I'm going to say email regular expression dot, and I'm going to say has a match with this. And this refers to the actual current instance of our string. So what's basically going to happen is that when we call the whatever string that we have dot isValidEmail, it's going to call this getter. And we are going to basically test to see if the specific string that we called isValidEmail on, is that a match to the pattern that we've defined here for our regular expression? If it is, it'll return true, else false. So this is what's basically going to happen. Then I'll copy and paste in another getter function, and this is to check if a valid password was entered. And then I'll paste in another one for valid phone and do command save. So the logic for all of this is the same. We just change the regular expressions. Then I will come back to my custom form field, and here what I'm going to be doing is defining what happens for the validator. So for the validator, what I'll do is that I'm going to say that I am going to get a final variable. It's going to be returning an optional string back to us. I'm going to say that it'll be a function, and the function will take in a string. And then the name for this is going to be validator, like so. And then I'll say that this is going to be required parameter. So I'll do required this dot validator, like so. Then I'll take this validator property and I'll set that to be the validator property here. And then I'll go back to my home page, and now for each of these custom form fields, I'll define the validator function. So the validator here is going to be to firstly check if the email is correct or not. So to check if the email is correct or not, I'll define the function first. So if you remember, for the function signature, we said that it's going to take in a string. And then the validator here is going to be, we're going to say if the value dot, and then I have to specify if it's a valid email. So is valid email, as you can see, and it's allowing me to import these extensions from the specific utils extensions file that we have defined. So is valid email. And since I want to check if this is false, only then do I want to return an actual error. Either I can do it this way, or I can add just an exclamation mark before here. So if the value.isValidEmail is false, then this function block is going to be called. Otherwise, we'll return null, and returning null means that the validation was successful. So within this, what I'll do is that I'll say that I am going to return a output saying return a valid email. Then I will just copy this validator logic and I'll paste it in for the next form field and the form field after that. And here, instead of this, is going to be is valid password. And for the top one, it'll be is valid phone. And enter a valid phone number would be the error that will return for this. And for here, we're going to say enter a valid password. So with this done, all of the logic is now being defined. So if I go to my form now and I click on register, you're going to see that we get an output because the validator functions were called and all of them failed. And because of that, we returned a string, and this string was showed. And because of returning a string for a validator function, the form automatically knew that the form is currently not valid. And as you can see, the errors were displayed to us. So now if I add some random value that's not a correct email and I click on register, it's not going to work. If I add a correct password, let's just say, it's going to allow me to register. But for the password field, I want to obscure the text. So for the password field, I'll set the obscure text property to be true. And as you can see, it obscured it. And now for the phone number, I will add a phone number. And if I click register, one less digit, it allows me to enter the phone number. And if for the email, I add a correct email, so Hussein at HusseinMustafa.com, and click register, now all of the fields are being validated. So this is how form validation works. So the next thing that I want to do is that once the form has been validated, I want to extract this information from the custom form fields and put them within variables that I can use. So to do this, what we're going to be doing is firstly creating some variables that are going to allow us to store this information. So since I want to store 3 strings, which in this case is an email, a password, and a phone, I'll say that I will create a variable. I'll call this string optional, and I'm going to say it's going to be email, password, phone on my homepage state class. Once this is done, I'll come to my custom form field, and there's going to be a function which is going to be called on every form field when a specific function is called on the form, and it's going to be called onSaved. So onSaved, what's basically going to happen is that we're going to get a value passed to us, and then we can do whatever we want with this value. So what I'm going to be doing is the similar logic as we had done before. I'm going to be defining a function that's going to get passed in, which is going to be called when onSaved is called on this text form field. So I'm going to say that we'll have a final. This variable is going to store a function reference, and the function will have the signature of just getting a string passed to it as a parameter. It's going to be called onSaved. Once this is done, I will come back and I'll say this is also going to be a required property and do this dot onSaved. And then I'm going to set the onSaved property to be onSaved, like so, and do command save. Then I will come back to my custom form field, and for the first one, I'll define onSaved. I'm going to say that we're going to get a value, and we'll do something with the value. And within this, I'll say that we'll call setState, and we'll set our email equals to the value that gets passed. Then I will just copy this onSaved callback function, and I'll define it for the other form field and for the other form field. And then for the phone one, we'll set the value to be saved in phone. And for the password one, we'll set the value to be saved in password, to command save. And that's pretty much all we had to do. So now what's going to happen is that when we click register, we're going to try to validate the form. If the form is validated, then we're going to proceed with the next step. And the next step is going to be to actually save the form. So what we can do for that is do formKey.currentState.save. And when we do this, what's basically going to happen is that the save function is going to be called on the form. And then basically it's going to go through all of these form fields that we've defined and call the onSaved function on them. And within the onSaved function, we've defined our logic for actually going ahead and saving each of the respective values within their respective variables. And that's pretty much all we had to do. So once the form has been saved, all I can do is print that we had validated the form and saved the data, and then actually print a console log app where I say that we show the email at the console, we show the password and the phone. So with this done, in the debug console, when I click register, you're going to see that it tells us that the form data was validated and saved, and this was the information that was basically added in the form. So once this is done, you can do whatever you want with this data. Either you can send an API request to a specific API and create a user's account. So with that, that's pretty much the basics of how to work with forms within Flutter. There are many other cool methods that you can access on this form key, such as, for example, dot reset. And what this is basically going to do is reset the form fields, as you can see. So feel free to tinker out with these methods and see the actual power of forms within Flutter. As always, if you enjoyed the video, then please don't forget to leave a like on the video and subscribe to my channel so that you get notified every time I release a new video. And as always, stay happy, stay healthy, keep learning, keep growing, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.